welcome to today's episode of Authentic Achievements, where it's my absolute delight to be joined by the fabulous Ben Arendt. Ben, welcome.
It's my absolute delight to be here, Kim, and to meet you for the first time. We've never met before. Certainly, this is our first interaction. It's been wonderful so far.
I love that, and I will just share with the audience in the honesty of being authentic as per the show. Ben's being very kind to me. For those of you watching, we actually met yesterday to do this recording, and I didn't press the second record, and it wasn't until we were about 40 minutes in, having a whale of a time, that I had to own up to my mistake. So Ben, thank you for so graciously trying to cover my blushes, but and for coming back. So that's good. But before we get stuck in and carried away, for anybody who doesn't know Ben, let me take a moment and share with you a little bit more about him. So Ben is the author of the Amazon best-selling book, How to Suck Less as a Manager, a practical guide to making your team less miserable today. And he's the founder of Depth Charge Consulting. Ben's years at the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, CEB, and Gartner shaped his approach to serving leaders and their organizations. Ben's consulting services and presentation style take advantage of his diverse background, including his stints as a White House briefer and an improv comedy instructor. And I was that excited to get stuck into this conversation yesterday. This is where it all went horribly wrong. But I mean, what a journey. White House briefer, improv comedy instructor. How do you get those to gel, Ben?
Well, Kim-Adele, basically what happens is I go into a job and then I've got about 2 to 5 years before a mob comes and chases me out with a pitchfork and a torch. No, it's I'll say for me, the journey has been fascinating. There have been times throughout it where I've said, what am I doing? Am I wasting my time? And as I look back at it, I think, hey, every moment was great and taught me something cool and different and interesting. But it really starts for me. I grew up in a family of either educators, teachers, primarily elementary, or military folks. I said, hey, I want to do public service. I'm diabetic, so I couldn't be in the military. And I'm not as patient as the people in my family who deal with all those children. Super important job, but God bless them. I don't know how they do it. So for me, I tried that stint as a CIA guy and had a wonderful time, met some amazing people, did things that I felt were really important. But I also had this itch to see what else was out there, and ended up in the corporate world and got to meet some of the most brilliant thinkers in the world, executives from every geography, industry, type of company, and sales, and then IT, and then HR, and then went and did some strategy consulting with executives. So I think for me, it's been a journey where each time the way I guide myself, as I say, is the next step going to teach me something interesting and new that makes me a more well-rounded person. And am I going to be surrounded by people that I enjoy? Kind of like Kim-Adele, I think we enjoy each other. What you didn't mention about yesterday, first of all, I loved the conversation. So it was an easy, let's talk again. But then after we realized, we kept chatting for like 15 or 20 minutes because the conversation was so fun.
We did.
So that's how things are going great. So, but that's the weird circuitous journey that brought me here and brought us to here today.
Oh, I love that, because I think, life has such a fascinating way of bringing people together, doesn't it? And you look at it and go, I wonder why. I wonder how all of these bits conspired so that so we ended up meeting these people in these situations. And I think, I often say life only really makes sense in the rearview mirror. When you're in it, it doesn't always make a lot of sense. Then you look back and go, oh, so that's why that happened, and that's why there was that situation and where they were going. And I know, as we discussed yesterday, but no one else could hear because I didn't record it. But I think for me, one of the things that I love about kind of your style and about the book around how to suck less as a manager is that kind of piece of saying you don't have to have a personality bypass to be a leader. There was this whole piece around corporate life when I was in it, which was, heaven forbid you made it fun. It was almost as if you made it fun, then you were saying, I'm not serious. And yet we face some really serious situations and, some really big decisions that impacted lots of lives. It wasn't that you didn't take that seriously, but that doesn't mean to say you can't try and lighten the load as you go, because if not, it's just depressing. Have you found that come up a lot in what you do? That kind of almost what do you mean I need to make it fun for people?
I absolutely think so. And for me, to be clear, I know, this when I was a comedian, so I taught improv, I did some stand up, obviously not well because we're talking here and I'm not, on some kind of Netflix special. But at least, I kind of got a feel for it. And a lot of people who do that, it's a cathartic exercise where they get to take on a different personality and be a different person. So some of the most depressed, unhappy people in the world are comedians, but I was just me. And that's because, I know this is probably why we had such a great time talking, because I think you're really similar. There's a lot of things that amuse me, and life is too short not to enjoy all these moments. And look, there's certainly been times in my career where that has not been a leader or a manager or a peer's preferred style of communication. And if that comes up and they're a very serious person, first of all, I know they're probably, could use a little bit of meta thinking about, like, hey, do you really need to be that serious? Is that what you need to feel secure? But on the flip side, hey, it's not my place to change people. I'll turn it off around them. I'll just be professional. But when I've stayed at jobs the longest, it's when I find an environment that accepts me for who I am. Now, the other thing I'll say about that, I think you and I are a little bit privileged to be able to say that. Now, I'm a cis male, straight, white. I fit all the criteria of the most advantaged parts of at least American society. I know a lot of other places in the world. So when I say, well, I get to show up as myself at work, it's certainly not with the same level of obstacles as a lot of the other people I've worked with throughout. So a little bit of a tangent, but I'd also say a great leader doesn't try to change people. He or she or they look for ways to help people become the best version of themselves. And a huge part of that is making an environment that is welcoming, open, and enables others to bring their full selves to work. And that goes not just for, hey, I'm a funny boy and I like to have fun and try to cheer people up and lower stress, but also, hey, there's a part of my identity that sometimes I don't feel comfortable bringing to work. Help those individuals know that you are a safe colleague, safe leader, and if it's something that they feel comfortable with, they can bring themselves to work.
Oh, I love that. It's so true. I think one of the things that is really important to me whenever I've been leading people is to try and be myself, because and show that vulnerability and go, yeah, I don't know everything. I will get things wrong and I will stuff up and not press record on things, but that's okay, because I can then take accountability for that. And it isn't going to, I've always said it's not the problem or the mistake that defines us, it's what we do with it. But you have to show them that first. You have to walk that talk by owning up to the mistakes you've made, to give them the permission, I guess, to be part of a solution.
Yeah.
Permission to say, I can get it wrong. I don't always have to get it right. And, I love that whole piece around it. It's true. We don't face the same hurdles maybe as lots of other people, because we don't have all of those additional discriminations that we've got to drive. But for me, one of the things that I always seek in life is, where are the commonalities? Because there's commonalities in all of us. And if we can find the commonalities, we can create a connection. And from the connection, we can grow and build, friendships, relationships, teams, better environments, better cultures. I think we've spent too long being focused on the differences that actually all they do is make us further apart. And so, I kind of I loved when we were chatting about this yesterday, which is, it's about creating an inclusive place where it's okay to be different, but none of us are 100% different to everybody else. There will be areas where we have commonalities, we have things. And particularly, I think, when we're facing, kind of change, disruption, which we know the only constant in life is change. It's almost like, actually, if you can't, it's the only thing that actually you could say is consistently going to happen. And so instead of being afraid of it, if we can make it something that's acceptable. And so I wanted to ask you, when we think about that, we know change is the thing we can't run away from. And we know organizations spend billions doing change very often badly. And in my experience, they've done it badly because they've not considered the people element of it and lead people through that. But I'd love to know, from your experience, how do you think leaders can better help their teams be more resilient and more adaptable to that change? Because I think sometimes when we deliver change, we make it an evolution. Revolution, and yet most times it is actually just an evolution. So we make it really scary, and it's like it kind of doesn't need to be if we recognize the first there's a constant. What are your thoughts?
I love all of that, absolutely. And I think your point, and if you see me jotting down notes, it's because I mentioned this before we started too. I got so much out of our conversation yesterday. There were like 5 or 6 stories that I've since used in my own personal life. So I think this brings up another great one. Your point about the importance of leaders being vulnerable. For me, that's a leading indicator of resilience because it's endemic to a few other things that I typically look for. And I love to, I won't spoil it but your TED Talk, which was phenomenal, by the way, you talked about a moment where you made a little error on stage and you felt highly vulnerable, but then you just moved on and nobody really batted an eye, and that was it. And I'll tell you as well, I am certainly not perfect. I make mistakes all the time, but I also don't try to be the smartest person in the room. And I think there's a piece there when it comes to resilience of trusting the people around you. Trust them that it's okay to be vulnerable in front of them, but trust that they have something interesting and vital and useful to say. If you're hiring a team of people so that you could micromanage them, you're wasting your time, which is your most valuable resource. Hypothetically, you're hiring people because they have skills that are useful to you. So I always say, make your team resilient, lead with trust, because there are numerous decisions that any team member is going to make during the course of a day. You can't be there for all of them. You have to create a relationship built on trust where if something changes, something happens, they have the agency to make a decision how to optimize their time or their approach. So I think trust is a huge one. The other one I typically look for is communication. Specifically for me, not holding cards close to your chest. If you trust the people on your team, they need to know what's at stake. They also need to know what your goals are. If something changes in the moment, they're working on initiative alpha, and all of a sudden a fire pops up. They need the right metrics in mind, the right indicators to decide, do I keep working on the initiative, or should I pivot and work on this thing that just came up? If they don't have clarity into how you're thinking, what your priorities are, what your company's strategy is focusing on, they're not going to be able to make optimal decisions, and that'll hurt trust. And then the last thing, and this is one of those, it sounds soft, but it's really not. It's mindset. I always have this preface. Hey, I'm about to say something that sounds like soft, like culture is one that comes up a lot. I trust could be one. But the truth is, the more we come to understand the human brain and how it works, the more we realize these softer things are actually fundamentally crucial to success. There was a study done across numerous years of every member of the U.S. Army to evaluate what could they isolate about individuals that would be successful. So they looked at this in terms of who won citations of valor or won awards for service. And there were only 2 indicators that they were able to isolate. And one was having an optimistic mindset at time of joining. The other one was feelings of pride when they joined. But that optimism, that positive mindset, it's shocking what that can actually do. If you believe it's possible, instead of believing it's not, you can get things done even in really terrible circumstances. And then the last thing I'll say in there is just something you said. Change is inevitable. Assume as part of that mindset, as part of your team culture, we're going to make a plan. It's probably going to change. When it does, here's what we do. And just accept that it's going to happen. No plan is going to, have a timeline of a year. That nothing is going to be constant enough for you to carry something that far. Assume it's going to change.
So I love that. It's so true on so many levels. I think there's, as we said yesterday, one of my favorite phrases, which I'll share, is, we have all these things that we call as soft skills, and yet if they really are soft, why do people find them so hard? And I think we have to find a lot of that, haven't we? Of this really complex stuff that is, human beings are messy, emotional beings. You can't control that. You've got no way of knowing where that's going to go, and therefore the alleged soft skills are about being comfortable with the uncomfortable. about holding the space for people wherever they are, and about taking the courage to give them permission to be part of the solution. And I love that you talked about that so eloquently, and letting people know kind of what your thinking is, what the what their parameters are, what decisions they can make, allows them to be part of the solution. Whereas if you micromanage them, they're just waiting for you to give them the next command, and that really takes away a lot of the power for you and for the broader team. And I think it's one of those where, if you get it right, if you get it into that place where you allow everybody to play to their strengths. I remember I've said this oftentimes, my very best leadership lesson came from being a hairdresser, which may sound weird when I spent 30 years in corporate life and doing this, but when I was a hairdresser at 16, they taught us 3 things which I believe are paramount to being a good leader, and I'd love your thoughts on them. The first was, you have to listen to really understand what the other person is trying to achieve. Then you have to do your best to help them to achieve it. And finally, you have to leave them feeling the very best version of themselves. And I've always thought that's leadership. If I can understand what my people or what my customer wants, and I can help them to try and achieve it, and I have them leave me feeling better, feeling increase, then maybe I've done a good job. Maybe I am actually a leader if I've done those. And they may seem simplistic, but very often that's the problem. The simple bit works, then we try and overcomplicate it and make it a dark art so nobody can follow us there. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think that's brilliant. And it's like, your point about, well, I've been in corporate world for 30 years. And yet I have this like really foundational lesson from my time as a hairdresser. I do think that sometimes we take for granted how these variable experiences teach us so much. I cleaned toilets when I was in high school. I thought I was going to be a lifeguard at a pool, but actually what I did was clean a locker room. And that taught me a lot about how people interact with the people around them that are kind of invisible. I had another job where I was a bouncer at a series of estate sales. And that taught me different things about how do you communicate with people to be assertive, but at the same time be polite so that you're not creating negative. All of these things, fit together in ways that we can't predict. And I wanted to say that real quick, just because I'm exploring this a lot right now, because I'm working on my next book, which is How to Suck Less at Managing Your Career. And one of these kind of trends that we see is everybody's working in their jobs. Well, not everybody, especially the younger generations. The average turnover is about every 2.3 years. It used to be 1.8. And I meet a lot of people young in their career, early in their career, who say, I'm wasting my time. And I say, you're never wasting your time if you're reflecting throughout and learning things. Like, as long as you learn something that made you a more complete person, don't stress out about, I got to find the one thing that I was meant to do. That probably doesn't exist. Like, the job that you have in 5 years, 10 years, it doesn't exist right now. Focus more on what do I need to learn to be the person that I want to be, and how can I find those learnings? So anyway, I just wanted to compliment that idea. I know you did have the question about great leaders listening, helping, and helping people be the best version of themselves. I couldn't agree more. One of the first things I tell managers is, tell me about your people, or one of the first questions I ask. So walk me through, what are their hopes? What are their dreams? Why are they in this job right now? And if people can't answer those questions, often I get pushback. Well, why should I care? Because if you don't care about your people, if you don't understand what motivates and drives them, you're not going to be able to make an experience that's valuable to them.
Yeah.
And you get the most out of it's not just because it's the right thing to do and it makes people less miserable in their jobs, because we know there's a lot of unhappiness, but that's what makes people stay longer, is if they can understand how the work they're doing now fits into this longer term vision they have for themselves. And sometimes they don't have that vision. You have to help them make it. But I loved your point. It's being curious about people and being humble to assume that everyone has value and worth, and that you need to help them achieve it, I think are some of the most important things to team health, to leadership, and to creating an environment where people do more for your business or your organization, but also stay longer and are happier.
I love that. It's so true. It's helping people understand the importance that they have, isn't it, and how they play a part. And it reminds me of a very unauthentic time where I used to roll out this speech all of the time for places. And the bit that was unauthentic is, although the message in there was this was based on a true story. I created a story about Jaffa cakes. I don't know if you have Jaffa cakes.
I actually quite like Jaffa cakes. So we're in good shape here.
so I went in to do this speech to a room full of colleagues, and I said, I put Jaffa cakes on the table, and I said, right, I'm going to tell you the story of Jaffa cakes, and if you don't take anything else away from the story, at least you'll remember I'm the girl that bought you chocolate. At least got me a laugh at the start. I said, if it really bombs, I can do a reenactment of that advert, full moon, half moon, totally eclipse, but we'll do that later. And then got into the fact that there was a documentary in a Jaffa cake factory in the 1970s, and this guy's job with a piece of metal was to put the Jaffa on the center of the sponge. And the documentary maker went over and looked at him, and he said, so what do you do? And the guy went, my job is really important. And you could see the guy's eyes roll. And he was like, right, okay. He said, well, let me tell you why my job's really important. My job is to put the Jaffa on the center of the sponge. And if I don't get the Jaffa on the center of the sponge, the chocolate doesn't fully cover it. And if the chocolate doesn't fully cover it, its sell-by date is reduced, which means that we can't sell to corner shops because their turnover isn't great enough, which means our market opportunity is reduced and our market share is reduced. We can't hit our company goals. And that's why my job is really important. And I shared that story from our job as a leader is to ensure everybody knows their Jaffa cake moment. Everybody knows the part they play in making that Jaffa cake. And the bit that was inauthentic is the actual original story had nothing at all to do with Jaffa cakes. So I added in the Jaffa cake piece, but the documentary piece was true. I think it was actually based on the guy who was brushing at NASA, but understood the part he played in brushing the ground into getting the man on the moon. It's just very difficult to add in a chocolate treat to that to make it humorous. But for me, that's the point. Is like, as leaders, have we made sure that everybody knows the part they play in the bigger picture and why what we're asking them to do, even if it's seemingly mundane, is actually totally important, and we couldn't collectively succeed without them, because we all want a sense of purpose. We all want to think that what we did today added some value, made a difference, that actually we were noticed, even if to your point earlier, Ben, maybe we weren't noticed, but we made a difference.
Well, I adore that story. I do have a question, though. If a Jaffa cake counts as a biscuit or a cake?
Oh, I knew you'd ask me that. Apparently, officially, it is classed as a cake.
That's for tax purposes, right?
Yeah, it is for tax purposes. So I always thought it's biscuit, but apparently, all my childhood dreams are ruined. It is actually cake.
Just for tax purposes. It's kind of like the snack equivalent of having an account offshore in one of those tax haven countries. So it's just
canals of cake.
That's right. It's a biscuit that's just trying to avoid paying a little extra to the government. But I love that point. I think so. There's a couple things that are great about explaining what is behind the activity that we're asking somebody to do. One of them is, it gets them motivated. If they they're just pulling a lever, obviously that's hyper simplistic, or they're, debugging code for some very esoteric part of some broad SaaS tool that's being put out. It's hard for them to envision why that repetitive action, or why something which in the moment might not feel as engaging as possible, still demands the highest level of their attention. But I also think it helps them with that point that we made about making optimal decisions.
Yeah.
The example I love, I was talking to a person who, here's another lesson outside of the corporate world, used to be somebody who stacked shelves in a grocery store. And their leader said, hey, I need you to go, make sure that the following goods are stacked in this particular part of the store. And they got the sense from the leader that urgency was required. So they went as fast as they could, stacked everything, and had it out. Well, the leader was mad at them because they said, hey, everything needs to be exactly aligned. The labels need to be out because the district manager is coming later, and it has to look pristine because that's what he cares about. Well, if the manager had told the person, here's what I need and here's why I'm asking you, they would have done that. Yeah. So it's just as simple as that. Example from my own life, I was asked as a corporate researcher / analyst to put together a different way of taking in or absorbing our research. This is when I was working with IT leaders. And I interpreted that as, let's use a lot of graphics. We'll make stuff that's very consumable. I had interactive graphics on a site. I had storytelling it was much more simplified and much more punchy. I was very proud of it. And then after I was done laboring over this, they said, what the heck is this? We wanted something that would look good on a mobile device. I was like, okay, well, if you had told me that, I wouldn't have wasted 3 weeks doing all this extra work. That would have been so much easier. So I mean, I think this brings up another point too. We get to learn from really good examples, but we learn from these mistakes too, which is why being vulnerable and not feeling like you have to get everything right. Those moments when you look at each other and you say, oh, okay, we did this wrong. Those are the best learning opportunities that exist, I think.
It's so true. I love that, because we do learn so much in the moments that go wrong, and we also learn in everything we do. We learn from good leaders who we aspire to be like. We learn from bad leaders who we aspire not to be like. And it's in that constant curiosity, isn't it? It's in that constantly looking at what am I taking away from this? Because then there's never really a mistake we can't overcome. But as a leader, what do you think is the most important quality for them to work on so that they do make it suck less?
Look, being a leader is hard. I think your experiences, I'm sure, have kind of taught you that. All this, again, people, if you had heard the conversation yesterday, the amount of story, just keep tuning into Authentic Achievements for more samples of some of these great anecdotes. But it's hard. There's an infinite number of things begging for your time. You have increasing pressure to meet people where they are because they have different demands from their employer and they want different kinds of experiences. We have 5 generations in the workforce right now, each of which wants different things. But again, being curious, just observing the good and the bad. The thing that I see that is the top leading indicator for me that a leader is going to be good is this humility, this self-awareness of where they're imperfect, and that they don't have to be perfect. So that intellectual humility, that curiosity, that just awareness of how they think, that's what enables people to improve and reflect. And I think it's fundamental to connection, but it's fundamental to growing as a person. I mean, look, I wrote the book, How to Suck Less as a Manager. I want to be clear. I say this in the introduction. There are times when I sucked as a manager. The thing that I think qualified me to write the book, is I just observed a lot of suckage, both from, maybe from me at points in my career and from other people. But I wanted to get better, and I knew I wasn't doing well. And that's not to say I'm the perfect leader, because certainly not. There are leaders that I still hold, high up and try to emulate. But I think a willingness to look critically at yourself, try to improve, and to be humble enough to see other people's intelligence and value and perspective. I think that for me is what separates the really good leaders from people that might be good managers or organizers.
No, I love that. I think we are all just a work in progress, aren't we? And as I say to my little girl all of the time, our only goal in life is to be a better version of ourselves today than we were yesterday. And that's to be a better version of ourselves. So stop looking externally for validation, because it's not your path, that's their path. All you can do is the best you can be, and you can do that, that reflects and those takeaways. And be kind to yourself. If you made a bad choice, recognize it's a bad choice. You're not a bad person. And the beauty of choice, you can make a brand new one straight afterwards. Like, that wasn't a good one. Let me change that. Let me think about what could I do differently now. And I think what I love about kind of the stuff you're talking about is helping as a leader to create that environment for your people to also realize that it's okay for them to do the same, that you're not expecting a different level of perfection from them than you're willing to or able, because none of us are perfect. In fact, we're perfectly imperfect. Then you're willing and able to be able to honor and achieve for yourself. And I think they're the bits. And I loved when we were chatting yesterday as well. It was about those being able to make tough situations a little bit lighter, being able to add in a little bit of humor, because when we're people look to the leader for a sense of, the read of the room, isn't it? Like, I remember being head of sales once, and heaven forbid you ever didn't have the world's biggest smile on your face, because the entire organization would be like, what's wrong? Are we off the number? I'm like, no, I just stubbed my toe, or I just had an argument with somebody, or seriously, I just didn't like my sandwich. I mean, there were a million reasons why I'm not super smiley right at this moment. But you realize that, that ripple effect, and I think that was for me one of the biggest learning curves as a leader, is that you have the ability to have such an impact on everybody else's day, and that if you don't do that intentionally, the unintentional impact of what you do could make it suck around here. And I think when we were chatting yesterday, what I loved is you were talking about that kind of being intentional, doing things with purpose, and therefore creating that space for your people to also understand the purpose and understand how they could follow suit and be intentional and make those decisions, take some of that opportunity to really step up and grow.
I mean, I absolutely think so. I think, and I don't want to keep referring back to things we said yesterday, but this came up too. This idea of creating an environment where we talk about, hey, I didn't do great yesterday. Apologies. Here's what was going on. So, hey, I'm sorry if I was a little short. Or, ooh, that last report was not well received. Hey, what can we learn from that to make the next one better? But also creating space where an employee knows that they're more than a gear in a big machine to you, and in creating that comfort and that trust, they start to think of you as somebody that they can share, kind of how they're doing in all aspects of life. This came up in a conversation I'm having with another client, where we talk about the most important factor that determines if an employee is able to stay engaged with a company and their team is whether, in moments of dire feelings, so something could be happening in personal life or at work where they feel like their back is up against a wall, something negative is happening, they must feel that someone is supportive toward them. Mm-hmm. If they feel that someone has their back in that moment, that is the single most important emotional qualifier that creates a positive impression of the people around them and a willingness to be vulnerable. If you don't have that, it's 3.5 times harder to impact any aspect of their employee experience. So to what you said, if we can't create the space, the connection for an employee to volunteer, hey, I'm going through this thing right now. I'm sorry if I'm not as productive, but I'm having a little trouble. Stuff that, in the past we would say, don't talk about your personal life at work. And now we know in the 21st century, you don't stop being yourself when you come to work. The things that, you carry with you certainly apply. But that is key to being successful in the workplace. But by the way, I know, because you were a sales leader, imagine trying to explain this to some of the old school sales leaders that I work with. And because they're like, hey, I don't care. They need more money. Why do I care if they're, they didn't sleep last night because of their kid, or if they're having to take care of their mother? It's because, hey, pretend you were forecasting a deal for 6 months.
Yeah.
And you show up to a call and the prospect you were talking to just got acquired. It's no fault of your own, but you're not going to close that deal. That was going to, get you your quota for the year, and all of that is gone on top of all the other stress you're feeling. And you have to turn around and in the next meeting have a smile on your face for the next prospect you're going to talk to. How do we help people stay emotionally regulated in that moment so they can be there all throughout? And it's little things like this, like you said, Kim-Adele, where we create space for people to be themselves, to open up, all of that.
Oh, I love that. And we did always used to have that phrase. And I grew up definitely like sort of like late 80s, early 90s sales, which wasn't fun. But it was what it was. But for me, the thing that's fascinating is neuroscientifically we can't do that. So we tell everybody that we are logical, rational human beings, and yet neuroscience tells us that our emotional brain responds 24 times faster than our thinking brain. So by the time we think I shouldn't be thinking this, it's too late. We've already thought it. We've already been distracted by what that is. And so understanding that and helping people to realize that that's just human nature. We are neuroscientifically wired to do that. And therefore we can't beat ourselves up when that thought pops in.
Yeah.
Because that part of our brain works faster, no matter how logical and rational we're being in all of these other places. And it was interesting. Recently, I've interviewed some of the leaders that I had from my past who were very autocratic leaders. Who, you will lead from the end of my finger, and you will live in fear that you do not achieve everything that I expected you to achieve. And what was really interesting is all of them had a eureka moment in the last 10 years, that actually they got much more out of people by creating that safe space, by understanding who they were, by being a team culture than they ever had from the end of their finger, from their, I'm going to tell you, you've got to do this, I'm going to challenge. Because there's research shows that when we're motivated and we feel like we have some level of autonomy, whatever that is, some level of authority, should I say. So you've got some authorization limits. It's like, I can go here, then I have to speak to Ben, and we can go here, and then that actually we work 20% more effectively than if we're not given any of those. And you then got the research that says that I think it is something like 67% of people leave their leader, and a further 54% of people would take a pay cut to have a different leader. And when I remember hearing that, I was like, oh my goodness, if that doesn't make you sit up and take notice as a leader, that actually you've got a big part to play. And for me, more importantly than that, everybody knows that. So the minute you lose a good member of staff, somebody highly respected by the organization, you look bad, because everybody knows that statistic. So the reality is, the likelihood is they left you, not the organization. And for me, that was one of those, when you put that into that perspective, it's like, I therefore have to do what I think is right to keep them here and to keep them engaged. And the best way I know how to do that is to know who they are, know what's important, know how that's going to fit together. And that's kind of the real crux, isn't it, of kind of a lot of what you've been talking about is how you make it success is get to know them, understand who they are, the whole them, not the job description, not the I've got person A and person A does X, Y, and Z. They do emails on Monday to Thursday, and on Friday I expect them to do telephone calls. It's like, that's not who they are, that's what they do. But how do you pull that back? And I love that one of your questions, I just wanted to go back to that, when you first meet people, is tell me about your people, and you followed it with tell me about your hopes and dreams. I would love to know how many people can actually answer that question.
I would say not many. So another stat that I love, this is a Gallup poll that came out a little while ago, but it said that 82% of people who are managers aren't particularly good at the core skills that you need to lead people. So I would say that's a pretty, 1 in 5, 18%. When I ask, hey, tell me about your people's hopes and dreams. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, Jimmy is actually starting. This is true, by the way. I had a guy who was doing this, a clothing line for cats. It's a cat fashion line. That's his side gig. Like, the leader would say, well, why should I care about that? Well, because that's what he's doing with his time off. He's here because he's trying to learn more about business, so that ultimately it helps his entrepreneurial dreams. And that brings another point. You mentioned people leave their leader. If you're in today's world also doing a good job of getting to know people, there's going to be a time when it's time for the person to move on.
Yeah.
Where there's something better for them, that knowing what they want outside of your sphere of influence is going to be better. It could be they go to a different team. It could be there's a different company that's a better fit for the things that they need to learn. My advice is wish them well and help them get there, because you never know what's going to happen. They could come back in a few years with that much more experience and undying loyalty and want to support your business. They could be a customer. There are a lot of people who take that personal, and look, sometimes it is. Sometimes, and when somebody leaves because they don't like you, but a lot of the time, am happy for them and wish them well and say, hey, let me know if you need a recommendation.
Yeah.
Because what we want is what's best for them. And in the process of pursuing that, we help our business thrive. It's kind of the analogy I really like. So this is fun. So I have a friend who does Kung Fu. And there's a move he showed me where he'll put his arm on my shoulder and say, try to like bend my arm. And I can't. And I'm, I like to think I'm a strong guy, but he's like, the reason I'm doing is I'm actually reaching. I'm not just holding my arm out. I'm reaching for something in the distance. And in the same way, he becomes strong as he does that. I think that there's this side effect of invest in your people, be loyal to them. They need to earn it. Be clear about what you expect from them. And if they're not doing it, tell them, let them, hey, I need more from you. But as long as that contract is being fulfilled, your end of the bargain is getting them the things that they need that are in your power so that they can thrive and grow. And, at some point, if they leave, you'll see them again the way the world is. Don't take it personal.
Oh, I love that. That's such great advice, because I think it is it's amazing how people turn back up in your life later on in different places and in different parts. And I also think I've always thought as a leader, your customer is your people, it's your team. And if you don't deliver for them what they need to thrive and be their best and reach their potential, how on earth do you expect them to deliver to their customer what they need to thrive and succeed and move on? Which means the company can never, ever meet its goals. And I agree, I think sometimes it does come a point where you're like, this isn't right for you anymore. And I could keep you where you are, but all you're going to do is resent me, the organization, where we're going. And so instead, how do we help you to get where you need to be? And those people have either moved to different teams or sometimes, as you say, to different organizations, but they've always come back later on. They've always been an advocate for the company, because even at the point they left on good terms.
Yes.
They left in a positive space where it was acknowledged that it was the right thing for them to grow, and they didn't carry the burden of feeling like they let somebody down, feeling like just because you saw something in them that they're now beholden to you for the rest of their life, and because you spotted it and you helped it come together. And I think, again, that's probably an evolution of kind of how we lead now versus how we led, in the past. And I guess for me, I was given some really good advice once when I when I first started out on leadership, and I'd love your thoughts on it. And that was to make yourself completely and utterly dispensable through competence. Because it's really easy to be dispensable through incompetence. But they said, do it through competence. And I was like, okay, give me a little bit more. And they said, right, so if you're ambitious and you want to get on, you are going to, at various points, you're going to create the organization a problem. Because if you're really good at what you do, if you are not doing that anymore, you create a hole. And then you can get very frustrated with the rest of the organization because they're holding you back. But you are the one that created the hole, because you've done nothing about going back and filling it. So the advice they gave, which was about being indispensable through competence, was find your successor, find them, mentor them, and train them until it's so obvious, not just to you, but to the entire organization, that they are ready to take your place. Then actually what you do, so it's a risky piece, and people are like, yeah, but what if that take my job? And I was like, it wasn't your job then. It is risky.
Yeah.
I've done it a few times. But actually what happens is you demonstrate to the organization that you've put the organization first, that you've thought about where the vulnerability would be if you're a top performer and you get moved out. But secondly, you've demonstrated to the organization you're ready to operate at the next level, because you've just brought them up to speed and managed them to the next piece. So it's that whole, how do you make a twist on being in control of, and it came to me because of your next book, How to Not Suck at Your Career, which is actually how you don't suck at it is you take responsibility for backfilling yourself, make it really easy for them to move you where you want to go, because you've taken away any obstacles where they may look bad, because that will be the thing that holds people back from wanting to help you move on your journey, is how it makes them look. And if you've thought ahead on that for them, I guarantee they'll be on your side and you will fly.
I mean, I agree with all of that. And I think it sounds like you and I had the same leader, because that said, the way I heard it was focus on making the people underneath you able to do the work that you do, or something
Yeah,
to that effect. It was like, make it so you're irrelevant and you move on
yeah,
and do a different thing. And it kind of reminds me of two lessons that come up a lot. I think the first is, if what we just said sounds like something that you're uncomfortable with or don't want to do, that's totally fine. You might not want to be a manager.
yeah,
Like, there's a lot of people who are great individual contributors. And I think, again, back to sales, this is probably as pronounced in sales as anywhere else. You could be a superstar seller. Being a manager is completely different. It's different skill set, different goals. It's no longer about how you achieve, it's how your team achieves.
yeah,
And it's okay if you don't like that. If you want to be the person that gets the credit, specifically you're probably not really going to enjoy being a leader. If you're somebody who you look back and helping others create capacity or build themselves or achieving things as a group, if that's appealing to you and you don't mind being the architect of all of that, you might be a good fit. So I think part of it is, don't feel like you have to do this. There are way too many people that it's just the next rung in their career is something involving people leadership, and they don't really want to do it, so they're never really going to invest time in it and do a good job, and they're never really going to succeed, because it's anathema to them, and that's fine. Doesn't mean anything wrong with you. Just it's not your bag. I think the other piece of this is, building people is extremely hard, and if you can do it, trust that you are super valuable. So to the point you were making, this idea that, once the people under you can do the job for you, am I irrelevant? I suspect if you're able to help them, there's probably other things that you could do that a lot of other people can't do. And that's
yeah,
actually a theme in the next book as well, is try to figure out what makes you different. And then if that's what you like to do, lean into it. Make that the thing that you try to experiment with, that you try to grow. On the flip side, sometimes we are very good at things. Maybe it's building people, and it's not what we enjoy. Okay, well, that's fine too. Then time to see what other strengths you have.
yeah.
But I absolutely love the point, and I think that also speaks to what we said earlier about humility and vulnerability and seeing the bigger picture outside of yourself. It's not about me; it's about this collective whole. So, Kim-Adele, sounds like we need to co-write, How to Suck Less as a Leader or something like that.
I think we should. We'll definitely let's chat about that. But before we go, and I'm conscious that you and I, as we demonstrate all the time, could just chat forever. But before we go, Ben, and thank you for sharing such insight and being part of such a fascinating and insightful debate. How can people get in touch with you, and who's best to get in touch with you?
That's a great question. I think and thank you. The howtosucklessbooks.com is the easiest way to find the book, howtosucklessbooks.com. That'll also take you to the page that's related to my consulting business. So if you're a executive or a leader looking for training and development for your managers, looking to help them, I will say we talked a lot about the soft stuff today. I think that's just because there's not a lot of organizations out there that try to really have a functional approach to building all of that. And I do believe there are things you can do to build EQ in people and emotional resilience and regulation. But if you're also interested in planning, communication, helping people with motivation, those are all things that we can support. So you're welcome to go to depthchargeconsulting.com and drop us a line. There's plenty of places to contact us there.
Fantastic. And for everybody watching and listening, all of those details are in the show notes below. I just think it's always so much nicer to hear it from the person who is going to deliver that service than it is to just have to read about it afterwards. So, Ben, again, my thanks for joining us for the second time in conversation and for sharing such invaluable insight. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. I'm sad we don't get to do it again tomorrow.
Me too. But we will do it again soon. And for everybody listening and watching, thank you so much. And until next time, take care.